Hey there team, welcome back to the channel, welcome to my overview of Metal Slug Tactics. So for those not across it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I take a look at the first 2 hours of a game. That's the Steam refund window. Steam says that you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time, and broadly speaking as a rule, I would agree and say that 20 hours in, you're probably not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short punchy video, keep it around 10 minutes, broad strokes info, and then you can make up your mind on your own. Oh, what a banger of a little game that just sort of came out of nowhere. It wasn't really on my radar, but to be perfectly honest, I saw that, I don't know how you pronounce it, Dotemu, who cares, were publishing it. They're not the developers, but generally speaking, I've enjoyed what they've been publishing. They've been breathing a lot of life into like older IP, things like Streets of Rage, Ninja Turtles, kind of bringing a lot of cool stuff back. And Metal Slug, while I've never really been a Metal Slug guy, just for whatever reason, it flew past me, I've still been culturally aware of it. Its unique art style, which is carried over here, but it's always been a side-scroller type shooter game. And funnily enough, through Dotemu's previous games, I would have thought they'd just make another Metal Slug. They've done that before, and like the two aforementioned games I mentioned were sort of side-on beat-em-up type games. They seem to have a rhythm, but no, they decided, bugger it, we're just going to make a totally brand new Metal Slug in a totally different genre, in this case sort of like turn-based tactics, I suppose you could call it, and it's excellent. I really, really like it. So yeah, going into it, I feel like if you're a Metal Slug fan, you're gonna nut. Like, the music is just, it's got such a cool retro vibe to it. Obviously you can see the art, it's wonderful. But it's got a lot of those sort of hyped up, overacted Japanese voiceovers, like the Daytona one I always use as an example. Time extension, that sort of stuff, right? So this, whenever you pick your characters like Marco, Eri, Theo. It's great, I love it, it's very camp. But again, I have absolutely no touchstone other than knowing Metal Slug from afar. So for fans, surely great. For people from, on the outside, still very cool. You can appreciate the work and the love that's gone into this. So yeah, they've carried all the aesthetic across, but does it play well? I think it does, but it is going to depend on your sort of appetite for the turn-based tactical games that lean more puzzle-ish. I don't know the best term, but a lot of it is about combo interplay. It's got some really original stuff here, but it's not really in the, the other end of the scale, which are things like your XCOMs, to use a tired example. I know I go back to it a lot. I love those sort of games, but a lot of that is actually about almost roguelite meta progression, and we'll get back to that. There's a reason I've thrown that in, because this game is a roguelike. But in a way, XCOM, there is tactical interplay, but a big part of it is the arms race, right? Is the upgrades. Getting more armor, more health, more damage output as the enemy does the same. So this is actually not really like that. It still has sort of meta progression from what I've seen, at least in the ability to use a currency to unlock new characters for new runs, but I don't know if I'd even necessarily call that. That's just unlocking characters. Each run is fairly self-contained. You pick your 3 characters going into it, and they have their weapons that they start with, and they do level up within the run, and you can buy them a whole lot of cool passives and actives, but again, they're kind of less about plus 10 strength and more about here's a new ability for interplay. And you end up with an actual kind of action bar that gets really big, and you'd be getting up to half a dozen different abilities on each dude. And so it becomes more about picking the right tool for the job, as opposed to sort of brute strength trading, a la XCOM. So yeah, this is actually definitely run-based and way more roguelike in its leanings. For those not across it, the difference is roguelikes are the traditional, they're self-contained. When you do a run, hypothetically, you could probably beat that run inside of it. You don't need some account-wide upgrade of, plus 2% XP or whatever. And that's what roguelites, they're very modern, very in vogue. I'm not against them, but they are back to front in that you can't really clock most roguelites out of the gate. You have to grind, upgrade your account, and then it kind of becomes a bit of a snowball stomp as you go into the later game. They're just different. But the point is, and I don't want to rant and lose the thread, that this is more roguelike, which is kind of more rare these days. And it's refreshing. And look, it is tricky, though it's kind of forgiving. Like there's a lot of undo turn buttons, that sort of thing. Though there's some sort of UI glitchy stuff, and it kind of feels a bit slack in the coding department. As much as I love these guys, the work that's gone in here, it's a great game, it's beautiful. All of the above. You know, there's a lot of sort of mouse over, inconsistent, you know, hanging menus, and I've sort of seen some almost like hanging sprites or overlays. They're not really fading away like they're supposed to because it's inconsistently doing it. It's just a bit strange. Kind of glaring, actually, because it does seem a bit sloppy in such a fantastic game. But I don't want to rant on about that too much because it's not a deal breaker. It's just, it's probably something that they could patch out once they realize it, but you'd think they would have tested it and found it, because I did, and I've barely played it. So look, at the core of the loop, the most interesting part for me is the way that it handles kind of run and gun energy, which is cool because thematically it's kind of Metal Slug, right? So you're incentivized, you have the traditional move set of, one move, one attack, action, whatever, and if you use your attack action, you lose your move, so plan accordingly. But essentially, after you move X squares in one go, you will get what's called dodge, and it's sort of like armor. Call it green armor, right? And once you have that dodge, you have it for the rest of that turn. So you're kind of incentivized to really step it out and increase your dude's move speed if possible and get as many of these dodge shields because they are hard armor mitigation. So if you run a long distance for your dude's move and he gets 3 of these dodge points, these green shields, and someone attacks him doing 4 damage, he will only take 1 damage. And he will take that. You could get attacked by 20 different dudes, and he's still only going to take 1 damage per attack. So it's actually really important to try and move your dudes and get the most out of their move distance as well, which is really unusual. These sort of games are a bit more about turtling and angles. And this is also accompanied by blue armor points, whatever you want to call it, which is from cover. So if your dude is standing in cover, you can mix and match that kind of mitigation. However, cover takes damage. It's not directional, just because it is visually. Again, I'm all right with that. Abstract gameplay mechanics to make a game fun is all that matters. So as long as your dude has cover next to him, he has cover, but it will take health damage and get blown up, so you have kind of destructible terrain. So often in the early going, what you'll get is probably 2 dodge armor from moving your full move, and if you move your dude into a cover spot, he'll get 2 blue. So he'll have 2 green, 2 blue, and a lot of the enemies in the beginning do 4 damage, and so that will hard mitigate any damage done. And of course, you can't really sit still, ever actually, because that makes you vulnerable, and your dudes only have like 10 hit points. So that's like half their health bar if you don't anticipate that they're going to get attacked by enemies, and the enemies will aggro on your easier to kill dudes. And further to that, you can't just sit in the same cover. So yeah, you'll maintain that cover, but it's probably taken chip damage from the last turn. You really want that dodge bonus, so you kind of almost cycle dudes through cover, or at least keep them moving. And some of the way these levels are laid out, they progressively add the tile set as you move through it, and so you are moving through the level. So very run and gun, and very much in the spirit of a side-scrolling shooter like Metal Slug. It's so cool, it's so innovative, and it works really well. On top of that, as far as damage output goes, all of you guys have 2 weapons. They have their basic bitch gun, which has infinite ammo, and it's the workhorse, and then you have limited ammo secondary, and it depends on the character. Like, you can get a machine gun, which is pretty self-explanatory, but you can get like grenade launchers with different dudes. There's also elevation as well, and in this, it's just straight up, most guns can't fire over different elevations, so it is a bit rock, paper, scissors puzzly. However, if you've got a dude with like grenades, he can throw them up and down elevations. So again, positioning is king, but you have this synchronization, I think it's called, method, and this is how you really want to do damage. Which the idea is, if you, let's say you line up bloke number 1 in line to do a shot, and you bring number 2 along to fire on that same enemy. And once you trigger that second dude's attack, the first guy will do a bonus attack as well. So they sync up and they gang up. A lot of this reminds me of things like Mario versus Rabbids, but it's been a long time since I've played that, but I'm kind of getting those vibes. And the main character, Marco, I can only assume he's the poster boy of Metal Slug. Interestingly, he kind of has this support role. Again, some Gears Tactics sort of vibes going with this innovative kind of combo-y chain mentality of building out your game. But you kind of start to realize that he's less about firing his gun and more about positioning in a position where he will sink shot on the back of the other dudes. And every time he's involved in a sink shot, his sort of particular trait is it will reduce the cost of his kind of special abilities. Because there is a mana in this game, and wouldn't you know it, it's called adrenaline, and the way you generate it is by moving squares. Every X squares that you move generates more adrenaline mana, and then that gets used on these special abilities, and that's where your character really builds out. So again, this motion combo interplay is huge, and you can start really making some monster builds. Like I said with Marco, I pretty much throw him in the middle of things, try and tactically position where he'll get a piece of each fight. Then I start the fight, so then it reduces the cooldowns on all his abilities, or the cost for adrenaline, and if you use them at 0, he then gets bonus attacks, and then you can get passives that will give him a bonus move once he gets a bonus attack. Anyway, if it's sounding complex, it's because it is, but it's a good complex. It's not overwhelming. It's more like there's a lot of different ways to build each character, and I'm only barely scratching the surface. Anyway, so you do your runs, you move through these sort of randomly generated missions. After you do a couple, it sort of coaxes a bad guy boss out, and it's pretty spectacular. So you have to boss fight. You can find vehicles like the titular Metal Slug tank, and that's pretty awesome. Kind of gave me Valkyria Chronicle vibes. It's a bit of a power weapon, but it is limited, fuel to move and fire, and kind of expected mechanics. And yeah, there's all these other characters that I can unlock, but I think I need to finish more runs or whatever. But for the moment, I'm really impressed, actually. It's very addicting. And but like I said, be sure you understand it. It has that more puzzle interplay. It's about trying to get the most combo synergy out of your dudes and their limited moves, and trying to turn that into, well, synergy is the great way to put it, as opposed to, like I said, and circle around and finish back off. Your more XCOM things, which I love to death, I do, but at a certain point, they've got like 5 health bars worth of health, and it just becomes a damaged slugfest. So that's not really what this is, not at the moment at least. Anyway, I think it's great. You should check it out if you're interested. Team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.